You guys doing okay? Everybody good? Quick little check in. Yeah. All right. So, we've pulled these two. These are actually speeches that Huey P. Newton gave. This is from the book, The Huey P. Newton Reader. For those who don't know, Huey P. Newton is the co-founder of the Black Panther Parties for Self-Defense, which was started at Merritt College in Oakland, California, in 1966. As the legend has it, this really started over a stop sign or lack thereof. I don't remember the actual cross streets where the stop sign was supposed to be, but what ended up happening was youth of Oakland kept getting hit by cars, and Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, Dr. Huey P. Newton, because he does have his Ph.D., um, they kept advocating for the city to put a stop sign up. They refused to do so. So they took it upon themselves to do like street patrol, right? Making sure, stop sign, go, what have you. So this idea of self advocacy and community advocacy kind of blossomed and grew into this notion of the Black Panthers for self defense. Recognizing the needs of the community, they identified that police brutality was one of the primary issues inflicting the Black community. So that's when they started this idea of patrolling the streets of Oakland, and making sure that when police do stop individuals of culture, that is done in a just capacity, right? There's no brutality being enacted upon these individuals. And just showing this idea of agency and advocacy for Black people, right? And this whole notion of defund the police that's really popular in our now, they're kind of filling the void. If there was no police, what would we do for community security? The Black Panther parties for self-defense was filling that void already before this conversation around defunding the police became popular. Um, Huey P. Newton is a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant strategist and military philosopher. If you have time, I believe it's at Santa Clara University, was where he got his PhD. His dissertation is phenomenal. Far as a critique of the United States government, a critique of the United States Constitution, and the critique of impeding on marginalized groups advocating for themselves, that is probably one of the coldest critiques that you could ever read. It's not too long from a book standpoint, but it's a whole dissertation, so it's a couple hundred pages. But it's a phenomenal piece of writing. Um, so just to start it off with my notes, I really like the way that he opened up part one, and he's talking about laws, right, and who should abide by laws, right, and what laws are meant to serve whom, right. And he says that laws should serve men, right, or laws should be obeyed, not the other way around, right. And he says, men are not created in order to obey laws. Laws are created to obey men, right? And then he also goes on this idea that, you know, rewriting unjust laws is a basic human right and fundamental obligation, right? So if a law is unjust, I'm not bound to respect that law, right? In fact, it's my duty to rewrite the law to make it more just, okay? So this is how he starts off his critique. And then moving to the next page, he makes the claim that I found phenomenally interesting, and I'll read the whole passage. But as long as the wheels of the imperialistic war machine are turning, there is no country that can defeat this monster of the West. It is our belief, when he says our, he's talking about the Black Panther Party. It is our belief that the Black people in America are the only people who can free the world, loosen the yoke of colonialism, and destroy the war machine. Black people who are within the machine can use it can cause it to malfunction. They can, because of their intimacy with the mechanism, destroy the engine that is enslaving the world. Now, that's a very bold claim, right? And it's a lot of responsibility to put on Black folks within the United States, right? Like the only people who could dismantle this war machine that's enslaving the entire world, right? But at the same time, it makes sense, right? Because one, we're in the what they call the belly of the beast, right? We've been most closely impacted by United States imperialism, right? And we understand the inner workings of the United States. But I still think that's a very large task to put on Black people to dismantle this very omnipresent machine. But I'm very curious to hear your guys' thoughts on that as we get into class conversation. Um, and then he also says, the people must oppose everything that the oppressor supports, right? And everything that the oppressor does not support, we need to support, right? So we should always be on the opposing end of oppressor. And this comes strictly from the mind of Malcolm X, right? And he says, whatever the white man tells me to do, I'm going to do the direct opposite, right? So they tell me to go to war, I know not to go to war. And this is also echoed by Kwame Ture or Stokely Carmichael, who said, if United States imperialism is backing Jesus, then the devil is my comrade in arms, right? This is what Kwame Ture says. So this idea of my enemy's enemy is my friend, right? Um, And then he also says, right on page 136, um, the slave has always outnumbered the slave master, right? And the only way that the slave master's oppression is able to sustain itself is by the complicity or the surrender of those who are enslaved, right? He says, from a numerical standpoint, globally, African people are a large population in the world. He says Africans within the United States collectively are a larger population than some other countries in the world who receive full rights from the United Nations, right? So how is it that us within the United States, who numerically outnumber countries, let's just say, I don't even know the one for example, to be honest with you, but how is it that we have a greater population than some of these other countries who are experiencing the full benefit of being full-fledged members of the United Nations, but we can't get those rights, right? And he says part of that is due to our lack of unity, right, and our lack of organization. And he kind of gets to that deeper in the next speech that he gives. Um, and then the way that he closes the essay out. So on the second to last paragraph on page 137, he says, only with the power of the gun can the Black masses halt the terror and brutality directed against them by the armed racist power structure, right? So one, the gun becomes not only important, but it becomes instrumental in overthrowing this system of oppression. And then the final paragraph, the blood, sweat, tears, and suffering of Black people are the foundations of the wealth and power of the United States of America. We were forced to build America, and if forced to, we will tear it down. The immediate result of this destruction will be suffering and bloodshed, but the end result will be perpetual peace for all mankind, right? And he goes into, before that, a musing from Mao Zedong that says, for order to be a warless society, you must first engage in war, right? And the gun is instrumental in the process of engaging in war. So really, while this speech is centered around this notion of self-defense, which could be understood as violence, right? The ultimate aims of the speech is in the closing line of the speech, right? What they're really advocating for is a perpetual peace of all mankind, right? This is really what their desire is, and this is how he ends the speech. So going into the second speech, I have a little less notes for that one. So for me, this is where he draws a very clear delineation between the way that African people advocate for their liberation and freedom, right? And he says, there has always existed in the Black colony of Afro-America a fundamental difference over which tactics from the broad spectrum of alternatives Black people should employ in their struggles for national liberation, right? And typically he's saying that these tactics have been separated between violence and nonviolent, right? And then he says for the side of nonviolence, there's these what do you call them? The spokesman, but it's some kind of spokesman. Give me 1 second. The what does he call that shit? It'll come to me. But he says,
Endorsed? Is it
thanks.
endorsed?
That's what I'm looking for. Yes, the endorsed spokesman, right? Who has been endorsed by the power structure to echo these sentiments to keep the masses of the people docile, right? To keep them taking the same nonviolent approach to their struggles, right? So go protest. That's the proper way to do it, right? We're gonna go sing "We Shall Overcome." We'll go march in the streets. This is the appropriate way to express your grievances. And when we hear that play out today, right? There's a killing that happens. They know that there's going to be riots or protests that takes place, and they'll get Al Sharpton. They'll get the same figures that you see over and over again come out and say, we must remain nonviolent. We must not allow violence to ensue, right? This is what Huey's talking about back in 1967, right? Um, and then he talks about how, the proletariat, the black masses, um, the provocateurs, the militants, right? He says that they have more of a disdain for the endorsed spokesman because they know once that endorsed spokesman is removed from the picture, then you can begin the actions of really taking on the system of oppression, right? Um, Let me see. Yeah. And then also on the middle of page 140, it's the second full paragraph, and it starts with the masses. So he says the masses of black people have always been deeply entrenched and involved in the basic necessities of life. They have not had the time to abstract their situation. And this is where it gets really profound for me. Abstraction comes only with leisure, right? So you can think about these abstract theoretical notions that come with life only when you have the leisure to do so, right? It's hard to think theoretically, it's hard to think abstractly when your stomach is empty, right? When you're worried about how I'm going to keep the lights on, right? How do I feed my child to send them to school before they go to school, right? So those things take priority over dialectical materialism, right? These really abstract notions that people who think about the oppressed like to get into without dealing with the material conditions of the oppressed, okay? Abstractions come only with leisure. The people have not had the luxury of leisure. Therefore, the people have been very aware of the true definition of politics. Politics is merely the desire of individuals and groups to satisfy their basic needs: first, food, shelter, and clothing, and security for themselves and their loved ones. The black leaders endorsed by the power structure have attempted to sell the people the simple minded theory that politics is holding a political office, being able to move into a $40,000 home, and being able to sit near white people in a restaurant, while in fact the black masses have not been able to pay the rent of a $40 rat infested hovel, right? So it's just this distinction that he's drawing. And then also he's making it clear, right, that these black leaders who have been appointed, they have access to this leisure, right? They're paying rent on the $40,000 home, right? But while the majority of black folks who are in this ghetto, they're struggling to pay a $40 a month rent on a rat infested hotel or a rat infested apartment, right? So the disconnect between the leaders who have been appointed and the material conditions of the black folks who they're supposed to be leading, right? It's a separation there. And then on page 141, um, after kind of going on his critique of the leaders, the appointed leaders, he talks about real black leaders who were not under the thumb of the oppressor, right? He mentions Marcus Garvey, he mentions Malcolm X, right? Now, for those who know African history, and if we had more time, we would really get into the what I call the bifurcation of black radical theory or black intellectual theory. there's kind of like two camps, right? Could be as understood as Martin's camp, Martin Luther King, and then Malcolm X's camp, right? But if you would trace that camp back further, you would have individuals like Booker T. Washington and then Marcus Garvey, right? So Booker T. Washington would be in the in the Martin Luther King camp. Booker T. Washington was very much about the pulling yourselves up by your bootstraps, and work will allow us to get over oppression. Think back to last week's conversation we had with the souls of Black folks, and think about Du Bois going through the various things that they believed would get them free, right? And he said, we tried education, we tried voting, we tried work, right? So Booker T. Washington was under that camp that said, work will allow us to get our freedom, right? So you could say Booker T. Washington, you could say Martin Luther King, you could say Jesse Jackson, like these civil rights leaders who are on this side of the nonviolence, right? On the other side, you have individuals like Marcus Garvey, right, who advocated for self-assurance, right, who said, you know, be proud in your Black skin, right, be proud that you come from Africa, right. In fact, we don't need to integrate with white folks. We could go back to Africa and build up a great nation there, right. So Marcus Garvey started the Garvey movement, the Universal Negro Improvement Association, which was the largest organized movement of Black people in the United States, right? Malcolm X's father was a follower of Marcus Garvey. Okay, I'm gonna say that one more time. Malcolm X's father was a follower of Marcus Garvey. He was a Garveyite. In fact, he was killed in Nebraska for teaching Garveyism to the Black folks in Nebraska. So this is what Malcolm X's home upbringing was like, right? And so if you look further down on the final paragraph of page 141, Huey says it very clearly. The heirs of Malcolm now stand million strong. So the Black Panthers consider themselves the offspring of Malcolm X, right? Who is the offspring of Marcus Garvey, right? So they take up this branch of Black radical thought that says, yo, there's nothing wrong with getting your guns and getting on with these folks who's killing us, right? By any means necessary. And if you think about how many times Huey uses that throughout this speech, you could tell that he's a disciple of Malcolm, right? But listen to this final paragraph. The heirs of Malcolm now stand million strong on their corner of the triangle, facing the racist dog oppressor and the soulless endorsed spokesman. The heirs of Malcolm have picked up the gun and taking the first thing are moving to expose the endorsed spokesman so the Black masses can see them for what they are and have always been. The choice offered by the heirs of Malcolm to endorse to the endorsed spokesman is to repudiate the oppressor and to crawl back to their own people and earn a speedy reprieve or face a merciless, speedy, and most timely execution for treason and being too wrong for too long, right? So you're being treasonous because you've been wrong for too long, right? So for me, in part one and part two, who he's talking to are two different people, right? So clearly the target in the second speech are those endorsed leaders, right? And I think for me, in the first speech, he's speaking more broadly, right? He wants people to understand, one, the historical importance of self-defense, right? This is a country, America, that is founded on this notion of self-defense, right? Because they were grieving against taxation without representation, so they defected and came here, right? And when the British tried to bring them back, what did they do? They went to war, right? So Huey's saying, yo, how is that situation different from what's going on with African people here inside the United States, right? So if John Brown and the founding fathers have within their rights to pick up arms to defend their liberties and their freedoms, how am I wrong for doing so, right? And this gets to this conversation between the difference of force and violence, right? Force is justified. The police use force. But when the people do anything, is violent, right? You break a window in a building, that could be classified as violence, but the police could bust your ass, and that's force, right? So force is just justified violence, right? And that's the distinction between the two. Let's do this. Let's open it up for fishbowl. Is there anybody who wants to volunteer to fishbowl? Okay, Natalie, we got you and Megan. Anyone else want to volunteer? And Gladys. Okay, cool. And we'll throw. So we'll have 5 fishbowls today. Give me 1 second. Let me just write everybody down. Megan. Marlon, I have your hand up, bro, and I see it. You can fishbowl if you so choose, but I know you already did one already, so I think you should be good for the semester. Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, that's cool.
Okay.
Just helping out.
Okay.
Contribute
Okay.
ideas.
Okay. So what we'll do is we'll, because of the people who have not fishbowl, we have Natalie, Megan, Gladius, and Sophia, and then Marlon will be the first person to say a comment after the fishbowl has been complete. So I'll put myself on pause. Did I miss anybody else's hand from the fishbowl? I have Natalie, excuse me, Megan, Gladys, and Sophia. Is anybody missing? Okay. So whoever wants to start it off, it's on you.
I had a question. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but since MLK's approach was peaceful, was he kind of like an endorsed spokesman?
That's a really good question, Natalie. No, I'm gonna say no, and I said that with great contemplation. He has been used. Yes, in his posthumously, he has been used as an endorsed spokesman, right? They took in his message and kind of focused on the "We Have a Dream" MLK, but they won't talk about "I've been to the mountaintop" MLK. They won't talk about the People's Campaign, the Poor People's Campaign MLK. They won't talk about the anti-war MLK, right? So I think the American institutions in the systems of oppression have effectively used MLK's message as a symbol for the endorsed spokesman. But I think MLK himself and the work that he was doing is not per se that. Although if you listen to Malcolm X talk about MLK, old Malcolm X, what I call Old Testament Malcolm X, right, before he leaves the Nation of Islam, he very much so talks about MLK as if he's a endorsed spokesman. But I think a more nuanced analysis of MLK's work, I would have to say no, he wasn't. Although they tried to position him as one. Does that answer your question? That's a really good question, though. So either Megan, Gladys, or Sophia, you guys can go next.
I'll go ahead since I'm many. So I just want to share like a thought. I found it interesting that they refer to this country as the monster of the West. And I looked up monster because when I thought about monster, it's just this like, like scary figure. Um, but it's a question and a fictional and frightening creature, which kind of I think it goes with what you lectured last week about the white imagination. So it's a person who orders others killed for his own amusement, and that's kind of what was going on. And I also I liked how they said that Black people had the power or ability to destroy the machine in order to progress. So this monster, which is systemic racism, was utilized for Black people to destroy each other. It took them away from the purpose, the mission. That's how gangs were created, drugs provided, and weapons and other means for these communities to destroy each other. And in watching the LA riots documentary, I was able to see how this didn't happen in communities like Beverly Hills or, if it were to happen in those type of communities, I think that the police would have been there within seconds. but instead days passed and a lot of lives and property were lost, but it was property that wasn't significant to the system. But if it was like Beverly Hills, as I mentioned, or other communities that are successful already, I feel like a lot more attention would have been paid to those communities. But it's just a thought I had. And then a lot of people that were interviewed also said the same thing. A lot of Black people said, we could have been killed, but no one was there to respond. And we still see that. Sometimes what I notice is that, and I'm Latino, and I can't say that I have been through that as much as African Americans have, because they've endured it for so long. But even when I go to different communities, there are communities in which you can get a ticket for almost anything, and you just feel like, why are there so many cops here? There's nothing going on here. Yet you go to other communities and there aren't any cops, and there's so much that can go on. So kind of touching on that um monster. So it's just, this was written such a long time ago, but it's still relevant today. And you would think it would end and there would be, it wouldn't exist anymore, but sadly it still does. And there's a difference between peaceful protest and violence. But sometimes people get so tired, it's like, what else can you do? I'm not getting through with peace. So I don't condone violence, but at the same time, this country has done it for many years in order to protect what is theirs. So why is it so wrong when Black people do it? And that's kind of my thought on that.
Yeah, thank you, Glass. You said a lot. I'm gonna hold off my responses for sake of time because I know we have two other people who want to fishbowl. So either Sophia or Megan, it's on you.
Yeah, I'll jump in because a lot of what Gladys is saying is, directly in line with what I was thinking. The first thing was how he was saying, men create the laws and laws don't, create the man, basically. And I think that's so true because people are saying, well, this goes against the Constitution, blah, 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 and bringing up all these things. And I'm like, then rewrite it. Like, this was something created almost 300 years ago for a time that was completely different. And if you're saying that, people of culture and all these people are really equal according to this standard, that's not true. He's talking about basic human rights, housing, food, safe communities, and people are like, oh, well, you guys have that. And so instead of talking about equality, I feel like talking about equity is a completely different conversation, and that needs to be reflected in a completely different time. Like, when those people were writing the Constitution and whatnot, they had no idea where we would end up, the technology we have, the guns that we have, things like that. And so when they're saying right to bear arms, it means a completely different thing then than it does now. And so within that, the other thing that I wanted to point out was when he was saying, there is a world of difference between 30 million unarmed, submissive Black people and 30 million Black people with arms, armed with freedom, guns, and strategic methods of liberation. And I think it's really interesting. I feel like I've seen on social media this kind of movement of, the Black community arming themselves, and, they teach their children. And so I saw two photos side by side. It was like, this white family, blonde hair, blue eyes, and they had like all these little kids with guns and everything. And on the other photo, it was the exact same family dynamic, but they were a Black family. And the comments were insane. They were just like, this isn't right. And not like, oh, kids not having guns isn't right. It was like, this is dangerous. This is weird. I don't like the way this looks. I feel unsafe. And I was just like, you guys are completely missing the point. It's going right over your head. Like, the melanation of someone's skin changes the way that you feel about who has guns and who doesn't. And so that just really brought up that for me. And then the last thing was when we were talking about protesting, and the line that really got me was, so Black people may protest, but not protect. They can complain, but not cut and shoot. In short, Black people must remain nonviolent at all costs. And I was telling my group, we see people justifying, police shootings by saying, oh, they had a criminal record. Oh, they moved. They look suspicious. They weren't complying. And so you have to basically be like the perfect model citizen. And even then they will find some way to say that, it was justified, it was deserved. And so I'm also thinking about the BLM protests of last year. I flew out to Washington, D.C. for the Poor People's Campaign. Actually, it was next week last year. And they're saying, oh, you have the right to protest. But then I was looking around and they have you blocked in with military trucks. And they also are shutting down public transit. You can't get anywhere and you can't get away. And they have, barbed wire and chain link fence, making the distance between the White House further, and all these things set up. And so I'm like, you really can't protest. Even if it was peaceful, you are still in this box. So it's not even a right. Because if it was, it would have gone completely different. And so everything he's saying is still so relevant to today, and it makes me so sad because you really have to think like how much has really changed. Honestly. And this was written in what, 73? Something like that. And I'm like, damn. Like they just completely missed the picture. It blows my mind.
Just one quick thing, just because of what you said, is it's so profound. Juxtapositions for me are very important, right? And you can learn a lot from juxtaposition. So think about how she just articulated her protest experience juxtaposed to what happened on January 6th at the state capitol, right? So I'm gonna block off this whole shit. So where militarily we have you in a strategical trap, right? So if we wanted to, we could move and shut y'all whole shit down, right? But these certain type of protesters were able to breach the Capitol, right? And put their feet up on desks and take podiums and all this type of felonious activities, right? And they still can't, they're still looking for some of these individuals. Again, juxtapositions become important. Sophia?
Yeah, just going off what Megan said, it's just crazy how like it's still a repeating cycle, it's still going on. Nothing has changed, they just want, you know, to be protests and then that's it. Like if something happens, there's a protest, that's it. If something happens, there's a protest, that's it. And like how you were discussing earlier in the class discussion, how the Black Panther Party had first started off as a like sort of a kind of a community service, which I have seen a film called the Black Panthers Vanguard. I'm not sure that's the title. I've seen that film. And yeah, like they focused on, they were being ignored by, other kind of services. So they themselves, offered services. And even when they were just offering services, it was seen as a bad thing. When they offered protection, it was seen as a bad thing. There was even like when there would be an issue with polices, like or police using force, there would be Black Panther participants who would bring up like the Constitution, like you can't be, using this kind of force. Like they would actually have a book with them, like you can't do this, you can't do that, and they would still like be like, oh, like what are you talking about? Like they'd still use force, they'd still, and like just like how the other students have been saying, like it's just wrong, like in so many different levels. Like yeah, that's pretty much like all I had to say.
Yeah. And I was just looking at the chat, and Megan was talking about the feeding the children. I don't know, no shade, no shame. You know what I'm saying? I don't know how many of y'all receive free lunch or your children receive free lunch, But if so, that's a direct homage, direct thank you, direct gratitude to the Black Panther Party, right? There would not be these free lunch and free breakfast programs if it were not for the Black Panther Party. Being able to get assistance and aid for sickle cell and things like that. They brought right on time. Thank you, Megan. You're reading my mind. They brought those type of services to the community. HIV and AIDS preventions before this was even a thing, and before this was talked about. Right, you didn't start hearing about HIV and AIDS until like the 80s, right? But back in the 60s and early 70s, they were servicing the community around these issues. So in true the epitome of what they were doing were community service needs. That's extremely what they were about. And to piggyback into next week's, or to kind of leave some breadcrumbs into next week's lectures, same could be said about the gangs. And if when you get to watch The Bachelor of the Party, you'll see how their original inception were to feed the needs of the community. And then the government were able to kind of get in and co-opt them to something different. So one thing I want to address to the class, and we can open this up to a broader conversation. Everyone's saying nothing has changed, right? We're reading Baldwin, and we're saying, what Baldwin was saying back then applies today. We're reading Du Bois, and we're like, yo, what Du Bois is saying, it remains the same, right? So there's two ways to look at that. Actually, three ways. One, it's the brilliance of these individuals, James Baldwin, W.E.B. Du Bois, Huey P. Newton, et cetera, which they are. They're brilliant individuals, not taking anything away from them. Another way to look at it is the stubbornness of this institution, of this system to remain the same, right? The third way, the tactics that the oppressed, that the marginalized, that what Huey P. Newton says, the wretched of the earth, pulling from Frantz Fanon, right? The tactics that we have been conditioned to use has not changed either, right? So since Martin Luther King, we've been taking the same approach to addressing our grievances. Same approach. No shade to BLM or to the civil rights movement. But the same shit that they was doing in the civil rights movement, BLM is doing right now. You can put a split screen and it's the same shit. The signs may look a little different, right? But the actions are the same, right? To the point now, to what Megan's saying, they have it so organized, it's damn near a government-sponsored protest, right? They'll tell you where to go and how to go, right? So he tells us about the bifurcation in the way that we choose to address our grievances. And we can say safely from the 1960s, right? We've been doing the same shit and we begin the same results. Now, if we think back to the first couple weeks of class and we watched the Haitian Revolution documentary, they got some results, right? Some folks had to go, but the situation in Haiti changed, right? So my question to you is, while we're attentive to the fact that nothing's changed, we're still not willing to take other means to address our grievances, right? Because quiet as kept, he's offering us another solution to deal with this problem. He's telling us there's other things that you can do besides this protest, right? But we're more comfortable doing the thing that we've been doing for the past 50, 60 years, right? So where does that stem from? Why do we not so choose to take these other means of expressing our grievances? Because historically, we have examples of both, right? We've seen what happened in Haiti. We've seen what the civil rights movement's done, right? So it's not like there's not a historical precedent that has been set, but we still choose to go the MLK route, right? So could it be that our tactics has not changed, so the situation has not changed? It's a question. No answers? No thoughts on that?
I have I suppose like you know how you said like they brought up the alternative of it's basically a government sponsored protest.
Yeah.
Well, And I do think that in order to see results, maybe I'm not sure if this is what you're implying, but maybe take a step further, like maybe force things a little. I think that this is the way I look at it right now, is that yes, BLM and the civil rights movement are doing, in theory, the same thing, protesting, doing that. But think about what the civil rights movement was doing at the time and what they had restricted on them. Right now, I think what we're protesting is Black Lives Matter and like the police brutality. Well, we're we can say that black folks, white folks, Mexicans, everybody now has rights to pretty much everything, right? So we're not really fighting for any more rights than we are fighting for our lives. So we're not fighting for laws. So I'll comment on a few things that they brought up the Constitution. Well, that's designed to be the Constitution is designed to be vague, general, because it was designed to be changed. Um, so that's why they're not specific. That's why they are the Constitution was literally a guideline to how things should be, and it's to change. So I do think that we should take things in a more forced direction. It's more of what direction and how, because we're fighting for our lives, and then we're giving them a reason to literally hurt us because um, we're taking that step further, getting out of that comfort zone of that gated area of the government sponsored thing. So what happens then? Are we gonna be going to the Capitol now? You see what happens then, what's gonna happen to us. And I think that ignorance is bliss to them, kind of like when you take a test, like in order to get everything wrong, you have to know what's right.
Hmm.
That's how police, and that's how government officials, I think, are. They know what's wrong, but they know they have to ignore it. And in my other Pan-African Studies class, they brought up, well, the one thing that we know rules the world, money, um, and housing and stuff like that keeps us weak. Sort of like I'm gonna pick up like what everybody else was saying, is that how we kind of tear ourselves down. So not to get sidetracked, but yeah, I think we should be a little bit more forceful if we want to see a little bit more changes in terms of what should be done with policing reforms, with just ourselves in general, the minority, um, and just like hopefully Black people having to have a normal life here in the free country. So yeah, I think we should force things a little bit. We have to. We
Yeah.
have to.
Thank you, Ernesto. You said a lot, man. But I know Natalie's hands up, and then Megan. Go ahead, Natalie.
We can meet with force, but I think it would be the top 5% of wealthy people who basically control everything in government. As we have government officials who meet with lobbyists, and lobbyists play a big role in politics. What is restricted to every zip code or area code, school code, there's just so many problems to tackle where it's just gotten so big where everybody acknowledges it. But if we do meet with force, we're going to meet with the bigger force coming back. So it's a constant cycle.
Megan.
Yeah, going off of what Nat just said, I 100% agree because I agree personally with, what Malcolm X says, which is by any means necessary. But unfortunately, just like Huey said, you are going to be met with supreme force, superior force. And I would love to think, people had the same rights, treated equally, they built this country, why can't they tear it down? And that's not a right, but I mean, what I'm trying to say is when, money comes into it as well. I was at another protest on Rodeo Drive, and let me tell you, that did not last very long. And what I thought was so interesting is when we're talking about the media and with money and stuff, the police came and they literally, I saw with my fucking eyes, they dropped a car off, an old police car, and then they dipped. And so then the protest was like, yeah, fuck it, let's set it on fire. That night, that was on the news. And I was like, I think it's interesting. It's not one of the new, fancy police cars. That was interesting. And how they came in and, people will, in order to really, burn this whole thing down and start it from the ground, they're going to die. And we saw that during these protests. We didn't see anyone die during the Capitol. That was interesting. People lost eyes from, rubber bullets that aren't being used correctly. And if there was a huge revolution to really, like I said, burn it down, start it from the bottom, there's going to be a lot of people's lives are lost. And, unfortunately, people aren't willing to do that. Not that they should have to, but I see, these allies and stuff, and it's only convenient for them when they want it to be. They're not willing to stay out there when shit gets crazy, and people from the Black and African American community, they shouldn't have to do that either. They shouldn't have to lay their life down alone, or even if they want to for that. And so it's a really nice thought that could ever happen. But unless, it was someone of lighter complexion starting to do this and had millions of people backing them, I don't really see that happening.
Helena?
Yeah, just to respond to that, and also Natalie, like I know people are going to get hurt, but people are already getting hurt. People are already dying, and that's why we have to protest and have riots, which people are called rebellions, because it's true, we're rebelling against the system. Like if people weren't getting hurt and dying, like there wouldn't be such rage against the machine, right? The quote that I really like from this reading was like, the slavery of Blacks in this country provides the oil for the machinery of war that America uses to enslave the peoples of the world. And if you think about, like, in a broader sense, like with technology and and just capitalism and manufacturing, just production, literally they enslaved the world. And with technology, like, we're literally enslaved by technology. And that, again, going with that, the big white men at the top who are enslaving us, the top 5%, as Natalie said, the Koch brothers, the freaking, like, the top guys, they're basically a part of, like, Congress. Yeah. They have them in their pockets, or they have them, like, if you watch the documentary 13th, and, like, that's why it's so hard. That's one of the reasons why it's so hard to change the laws. They profit off the laws. Same with the prison industrial complex. We profit off of putting Black people in jail. They make stuff like, also, I'm sidetracking, but like Angola Penitentiary, like it's basically enslavement. And sorry I digress, but going back, reeling myself back in, because I just get super passionate about it. Like, literally, the suffering that African people have gone through, that people in general, poor people go through, the suffering that they go through, it's literally just, it's oil for the machinery. And America wouldn't be the same without it. And I feel like that's why nothing has changed. We just keep seeing the same things in different circumstances. And like before Martin Luther King, there was all these people, but a lot, like, I was taught, like, oh, he was the first revolutionary guy to fight for civil rights. No. Or Harriet Tubman, even. Oh, she was the first person. Well, that we know of, that we were taught. And without not knowing it, without being enslaved, they enslaved our minds too. And that's why the Black Panther Party was trying to educate, and that's why all these groups were trying to educate people. Like, but without that education, we're not going to know, and they're going to keep enslaving our hearts and minds to believe what they think, because they're profiting off of it. And sorry, thank you for listening to my TED Talk.
Thank you for the TED Talk. but I think you're all right, and I think you guys bring up some very interesting points. But it's fuck it. I'll just go with it. I'm gonna sound crazy, but we're just gonna be in this moment together, okay? I study revolutions. Like I literally study them very seriously. And in passing, in the what we just read, Huey mentions guerrilla warfare, very very quick and very in passing, right? So if you think about the documentary that we watched on Haiti, let's think about the dynamics of the Haitian Revolution, right? The French had all of the military power at their disposal, right? Haitians had nothing. They literally had machetes, right? But their knowledge of the land, right? Their knowledge of military strategy allowed them to engage in a successful revolution, right? Take it further. Vietnam. You can't compare what the United States had versus the military abilities of Vietnam, far as the technology, right? Far as the weaponry, right? But by and large, the United States lost that war, right? Throughout the entire decade, well, I'll say the later half of the decade of the 60s, there were anti-colonial movements taking place all throughout Africa and all throughout Asia, right? In all of those circumstances, the victors were outgunned, right? But they won, right? There's a book called Blood in My Eye by a Black Panther Party member named George Jackson. And he talks about very detailed and explicitly how to engage in urban guerrilla warfare, right? And he says that the enemy could be defeated because of their overconfidence and their routines, okay? So if you live in urban areas and you pay close attention to how the police move in your areas, they're very much on a routine, right? So where I live in Claremont, there's a street that separates Claremont and Pomona, okay? I don't know if y'all know about the distinctions between Claremont and Pomona, but Pomona's hood is fuck. Claremont is like uppity college town, right? So part of the Claremont's police duty is to keep Pomona out of Claremont, right? So there's a street. So what they do is they patrol the borders, right? In the book, Blood of My Eye, George Jackson tells you when they patrol borders, they patrol them in twos, and they'll be about 8 to 20 minutes apart. Okay, I'm reading this. Let me test the theory with the practice. So I started watching how they move through the borders of Claremont. Just like George Jackson says, within an 8 to 20 minute window, you see 2 units go, right? So I just bring these little things up to say, they're not as infallible as we've trained ourselves to think that they are, right? But what is true and what you guys are saying is how many of us are willing to risk our security, to risk our life for the freedom of everyone, right? I'm gonna be real. I got 2 kids, I got a wife. I don't know if I'm willing to go get in a shootout with the police for everybody's freedom right now, right? You talk to me maybe 25, maybe 20 years ago, 19 years ago, maybe, right? So another thing that comes into play, and Tupac said this wonderfully, when you get 30, you don't want to be engaged in that type of activity because now you got a house, now you got kids, now you have material investments that you need to protect, right? But when you're young, you don't have those attachments, so you're more willing to engage in this type of activities, right? Huey P. Newton and Bobby Seale, when they started the Black Panther Party, they were 19 years old, right? No jobs, no family, no real responsibilities, right? But here's a caveat, and this is going to lead us into next week's information. And this kind of goes back to what Helena says, in the sense that we're dying anyway, right? We're dying anyway. So I think about this segment in the communities, and I could talk about Black communities, but this goes as well in the indigenous communities, the segment of our population that we call gangs, right? They're engaging in acts of war against each other, dying anyway. going to jail anyway. In fact, you go to jail, you do a bid, right? You come out with more stripes than when you went in, right? It's part of your initiation to being gang, is to do these bids. And the longer your bid is, the more stripes you get on your jacket, right? So I'm like, well, shit, if we dying anyway, and if you banging and you hard as like you say you are, redirect the guns to the real enemy. We have a whole force of people who are doing the dying and who are doing the killing anyway. Why be a pariah in your own community and address the grievance with the people who are causing the harm? If you're gonna be hard like that and you're gonna do it anyway, right? Why damage your own when you have a force that's overtly killing you, right? So to me, this is where this idea of political education comes in. Just imagine if every gang, M13, Crips, Bloods, Chicago gangs, GDs, Gangster Disciples, right? The Vice Lords, Latin Kings, right? If they were organized in a sense to where when someone comes in to damage our community, you got to go through them gangs first, right? To me, there makes no sense in the world. And this is a conversation we're having amongst each other, but I'm just keeping it 100 with y'all. There's no sense in the world that George Zimmerman is walking around right now doing the shit that he's doing, selling the guns and doing. Somebody should have got his ass a long time ago. I'm just saying, right? Like if this is what you say you about, if you hard, he need to be got, right? But this are some of the lack of the organization in the political education that's keeping us in the situations that we're in, right? So let me in my soapbox. Let me get off my soapbox and let me in my TED Talk. Just looking at the chat. Okay, Rialto. Yes, Ernesto. So I went to Rancho High School. My wife is from Eisenhower, so I understand both of those dynamics there. Yeah, and that's another thing. The gentrification is going to make the police force even more of a presence because now that border is beginning to bleed, right? And so now the protection of property becomes even more of a priority because you don't want to damage the newly built coffee shop, right? Okay, so for our last meeting of this intersession, we'll watch the Bastards of the Party, we'll watch LA 92, and we'll discuss that for Thursday. I'm gonna hop off a line right now and redo the link to make sure you guys have access to the Bastards of the Party. I really like how our conversation went today because it's going to be really informed by what we watch next week. And then think about it from as a progression standpoint, right? So think about it from what we read now, then think about it, the Bastards of the Party, and then think about the LA Watch Riot. Think about it as a genealogy, right? Like one thing leading to another thing, leading to another thing, because it's very much is tied like that. Also, in the Bastards of the Party documentary, be attentive to the narrative of opportunities and resources being stolen or taken away from the communities, and then their abilities or attempts to try to restore those things that were abstracted, right? Like be very attentive to that narrative because it's going to make a lot of it make sense, and then it will give you very much of an aha moment when you watch the LA 92 documentary because it's like all these things boiling over to this one moment, right? Are there any questions, comments, or concerns from me? Nope. Okay, so just know you guys got a little bit more time on your final paper proposal and those journals you have until Monday. If there's any questions, don't hesitate to shoot me a text or an email and we'll converse or try to get the situation ironed out as best as we can.